Hello and welcome back for another Giant Slayer TFT Top 10 video. Today's video will be a countdown of the top items for ranked play going into patch 10.11. This list will highlight the strength of these items and why you should keep them in mind for the new patch. One last thing to note is that as always, this list is not in order of strength as each item is viable depending on the right situation. With that said, let's get into it. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come, so be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer TFT social media pages. Alright folks, let's get back to the list, and to start it off, we've got Serifs Embrace coming in at number 10. Serifs overall is still a valued item depending on the champion, but it certainly has lost a lot of its versatility with the mana per tier reduced alongside with Chalice of Favor getting nerfed. But despite those changes, it's still doing well when given to specific champions. By far the best champion currently to slap a Serifs on is going to be Ziggs in a Ziggs reroll composition because two Serifs allow him to chain cast his ability. Other than that champion, it's great on Misfortune, Vel'Koz, and in the rare cases where someone is playing Star Guardian, it's still core on Syndra. Lastly, it's not a must-have on Kai'Sa, but it's certainly helpful for her. In general, Serifs is a bit more niche and elusive than it used to be, but it's still a valuable item in the right circumstance. Next up on the list, we have Last Whisper as the number 9 item. Last Whisper did receive a nerf in patch 10.11 as the armor reduction went from 90% down to 75%. This is definitely a sizable nerf, but the item itself is still good for certain carry champions. Jinx and Jhin are great options for Last Whisper as reducing enemy armor increases their damage output by a good amount. Aurelia is another champion that benefits from the armor reduction, and lastly, Xayah is still a viable carry for Last Whisper. While Xayah did receive a nerf in 10.11, she can still use Last Whisper extremely well. Shredder did get overall weaker, and as such, Xayah 3 may not be played as often in 10.11, but having a Xayah 2 for the early and mid game to hold on to items is still going to be great. So with that, having a Last Whisper on Xayah to later be transferred over to one of the 4 cost carries is a perfectly good option to have. Overall, Last Whisper isn't an item that you should make without hesitation anymore, but should instead save it to give to specific champions. Let's talk about 2 great utility items, starting out with our number 8 item on the list, Shroud of Stillness. Shroud of Stillness may seem odd on this list as it's something that you don't usually make every game. Oftentimes you either end up with it because it was a full item on the carousel or you had nothing else to make with your remaining components. That's totally okay because later on in the game it has a ton of value. It slows down the first cast on multiple enemies, so when you scout out and position well, it can shut down most of an enemy's board right from the beginning. Or it can specifically target champions like Gangplank or Vel'Koz to slow down how effective those units are early on in a fight. Lastly, it also provides some dodge chance, which can make it a great item to put on a frontline champion or even the super mech. The second utility item to talk about is Zephyr, as it comes in at number 7 on the list. Honestly, what more needs to be said about Zephyr that hasn't already been said? Zephyr has been a staple utility item since set 1, and in set 3 patch 10.11, that remains true. The ability to take an enemy champion out of the fight for 5 seconds is insanely useful and versatile. It's easy to overlook Zephyr and favor other items before, which is fine to do, but if you ever find yourself with an extra belt and cloak, it's always worth it to make a Zephyr. Generally, you only want 1, though a second Zephyr can come in handy in the right situation. All in all, this item is the epitome of utility, and you'll always find value from it if you scout and position well. Up next, we've got a solid defensive item coming in at number 6 on the list, Bramble Vest. Bramble Vest is one of those items that you make every game and get good value from it. The defensive stats it brings, along with negating critical damage, makes it a valuable asset for your frontline. Alongside the defensive portion of it, it does a decent amount early on, which is why you often want to pair it with early Vanguard. Later on in the game, being able to negate crit damage really helps given how popular items like Infinity Edge are in the meta for physical damage carries. Another bonus of making Bramble Vest is that Last Whisper got nerfed in 10.11. That item was generally the best counter against Bramble Vest besides magic damage, and with it being less effective and played less often, it really increases the value of Bramble Vest. Definitely look to make this item if you're presented with the option for it, as it's likely to be helpful throughout every single stage of the game. Continuing on the theme of defensive items, let's talk about a pair of them coming in at number 5 on the list. We've got Quicksilver and Trapclaw. These 2 items really have an impact on the meta given how prevalent CC is in the meta. Being able to negate any crowd control for 10 seconds is an extremely useful ability when you need needs your carry to either auto attack uninterrupted or cast a channeled ability for the full duration. Where Trap Claw comes in handy is to prevent those one-off instances of CC, but also protect your carry for a longer period of time against certain champions and abilities. For example, if Kaisa jumps onto your backline and casts her ability on your carry, having a Trap Claw will instantly shut her down and stun her for 4 whole seconds. So both items can be extremely valuable in the right situation. One last thing to note about these items is that they do provide a 20% dodge chance, which is good on any champion, but definitely gets a ton of value on the Super Mech. Speaking of the Super Mech, we've got Demolitionist Charge coming in at number 4 on the list. While this item tends to be relatively niche, it's still highly effective. Mainly, you're going to see it be played in Mech Infiltrator as a core item on Kaisa, but with how strong Gangplank has been, it's not uncommon to see it played alongside him in various other builds. The big reason as to why Demolitionist Charge is valuable in those situations is that it enables an AoE stun, but it's certainly situational and definitely not viable to get each game given that it requires a spatula. We've reached the top 3, and without further ado, the number 3 item on our list is Deathblade. Deathblade came in swinging in 1010 with a buff making it so it starts the fight with 1 stack. That change was all it took to make this item common in the meta, and it will remain so in patch 1011. While Xayah and the Shredder build in general has been nerfed, which is where you'd often see Deathblade played, it's still a viable item on several ranged carries. Jinx, Jhin, and Aurelia can all use Deathblade effectively. Having that initial stack of extra damage really helps them ramp up in the fight much quicker. On top of that, it makes the fight snowball out of control rather quickly once one of those champions begins getting kills. With Last Whisper being nerfed in this patch, it's definitely worthwhile to consider Deathblade when running any physical damage carry. The item coming in at number 2 on the list is Morellonomicon. Generally, Morellonomicon and red buff go hand in hand, but there's less instances where red buff is valued now. Yes, it's still good for blasters like Jinx, but overall Morellonomicon is being played more often on a wider range of champions. Examples of champions that you're likely to see Morellonomicon played on are Kayle, Kaisa, Vel'Koz, Gangplank, Twisted Fate, and Misfortune. In general, this item has use for any AoE-based magic damage focused ability. With AoE being so important right now in the meta, this item is definitely highly valued and worth picking up in most compositions. And the number 1 item on our list is Guardian Angel. Guardian Angel is just one of those items that you can make every single game and always get value from it. It's one of the best to make early on as well because it doesn't force you to play any specific champion or composition. It's just solid, so having it early on or at any stage of the game is going to be useful. Specific champions to play it on definitely include any unit with an important ability. Gangplank, for example, is one of the best to have a Guardian Angel, as making sure his ultimate goes off at least once is incredibly important. But you don't have to make this item just for champions like Gangplank. It can be a solid choice for keeping a frontline champion alive longer or giving it to your carry so they can continue fighting once they die. Alright, that's going to be it for our top 10 items, but before we go, there's a few extra items we'd like to talk about on our honorable mentions list. First up, we've got Thieves' Gloves. This is an item that hasn't really gotten a lot of attention throughout set 3, which is a bit of a shame because it's one of the items that you can make early on and get a lot of value from. It's also great later on because it's going to make your secondary or third carry much more useful when they get multiple items and stats from it. Where Thieves' Gloves do fall short is the fact that the components it's made from, Sparring Gloves, tends to be highly sought after for multiple items. Most of those items are for specific uses and as such are more valued because they provide a direction for a composition, whereas Thieves' Gloves does not. Overall, this item is worth making if you have the option to do so, but it's not a must-have every game. Next up for our honorable mentions, we have Deathcap. Deathcap is definitely valuable for a lot of champions, but it's an honorable mention as it overlaps a bit with Morellonomicon. This is because both the items are primarily played for champions with abilities that do a lot of magic damage and have AoE. Because of that AoE, Morellonomicon tends to be more useful given the burn effect and applying healing reduction. But the boost in damage that Deathcap provides is definitely valuable. Give it to a Gangplank or a Misfortune or even a Xerath and those champions are going to melt away the enemy team. It really does come down to whether the healing reduction of Morellonomicon or the extra damage of Deathcap is more useful for your comp. Another downside to Deathcap is it's a bit harder to commit to making than a Morellonomicon. For example, on Kayle, 2 rods can be used to make a Rageblade and a Morellonomicon. If you instead had used them to make a Deathcap, you may find yourself in a worse position for your Kayle than if you had saved both rods. It's definitely situation dependent, but in general, Morellonomicon is slightly more favored than Deathcap. And lastly, we've got Hand of Justice. This is an honorable mention because it's not a core item for any champion. It's It's fantastic on a lot of units, but the fact is it's inconsistent due to the 50% chance of rolling one effect or the other. Because of that, it's not an item you want every single game. It's something that you can make when you have the components for it and nothing else worth making. You will get value from the item, but it's not guaranteed to be useful every single round. That's all we've got for you today, folks. There's going to be big changes coming in patch 10.12, so this list is to help those of you wanting to climb before the mid-season update hits. Consistency is always important, and the items on this list will help with that. Let us know in the comment section below what items you're finding to be the most useful in 10.11. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.